Esto es carne de canon. Estamos en Mexico. Yo soy T.R. Hudson. And today, my guest today is John Slaughter. And we're going to be switching in from Spanish to English because we're discussing Cormac McCarthy's All the Pretty Horses. John, how are you?
I'm doing great, and your Spanish introduction reminded me of how it felt the first time I read this book, since I don't speak Spanish.
Yeah, that's it. One of the things, and I guess we can just get right into it. McCarthy doesn't he doesn't have training wheels. He doesn't hold your hand through it. He expects you to know what he's talking about and what he's trying to communicate. And yeah, the use of Spanish and English throughout his books is definitely it's one of the best aspects, I think, of his writing personally.
Yeah,
It,
no, I
it,
think it's really it really immerses you into the world that he's creating. The only problem is having to when I first read this book, I didn't have did I have my I don't know, I couldn't Google on my phone, so I had to stop and either get a Spanish dictionary or go to my actual computer to look up a lot of it because I don't speak Spanish. But other than that, it can, if you can speak it, I'm sure it draws you even more into the world.
and I guess that's a good way to introduce John Grady Cole, who was our protagonist. He is a third generation rancher whose grandfather passes away. His mother, who is kind of estranged from him, sells the land, so he is effectively orphaned, at least in terms of his birthright.
Yeah, he because his the ranch doesn't belong to his father, so his mother she gets remarried, right? Isn't that?
Later on, she does, I think. Right
Yeah,
at the beginning, she's just selling the land so she can get some money.
right. Yeah, so
Her
they're
parent
evicting
are
him.
John's parents are still technically married,
Right. Yeah. So
or they had just
he's
gotten divorced, rather.
yeah, he's being basically evicted, or they're being evicted from their own home, essentially.
Yeah, there's a really there's a really good scene right when the Mexicans who live on the ranch, who have been working there for several generations, they have to tell this old woman who was born there that the ranch has been sold and she has to move, and they don't know how to tell her that, and she only when it is told to her finally, she kind of has this resigned sadness about it, but doesn't show any outward emotion, of course.
Yeah, that part really kind of that whole concept of that part particularly hit me hard, just because where I live at, I've seen a lot of family farms get sold off by family members as they've
Mm-hmm.
gotten older, and I'll see these farms where you'll have, you know, pecan orchards and such, and then a year or two later they're just put up some shitty subdivision in its place, and it just reminds me of that. Like, this thing has been in these people's home for it's been their home for generations, and then it falls into the hands of somebody who just wants to get rid of it and get paid.
And that's, yeah, this is John Grady's birthright as far as he's concerned, really, even as far as his grandfather's concerned, but his mother, who takes ownership of the ranch after the old man dies, uh, she is she's a woman, I guess, is the best way
Yeah.
to say it. She's not really into the whole being a rancher thing. She wants to live in the city. She wants to live a life of pamper and comfort. And selling the ranch gives her the means to be able to do that for herself.
Right, and then this is the catalyst that sort of forces John Grady Cole to leave, because the last thing he wants to do is go move into the city and move into town and leave this life, the only life he's ever really known, right?
So he tells his cousin, Lacey Rollins, that he wants to move, or he wants to go down to Mexico to be a farmhand, or do something just to be a cowboy, to continue being a cowboy for as long as he can. And Rollins, of course, isn't going to let him go by himself. He has his own reservations, but of course, their bond is so strong that he couldn't possibly let Cole go by himself, even if he doesn't necessarily want to go.
He's more reluctant, but like you said, he's not. I wouldn't say he's just a passenger, but he almost feels obligated to go, like you said, because of such a close friendship. Because there's really no reason for him to go except to essentially watch out for John and to be his sidekick, really.
And the plot doesn't really pick up until they meet Jimmy Blevins, who is this young kid who's also a runaway. He's got a big horse and a big gun, and he has no business having either.
Yeah, he's an interesting character because they meet him and he's substantially younger than they are. Because if I remember correctly, they're about 16,
right,
I think 16 or 17, and Blevins is about 13 years old, and he's got this big bay, this very, very nice big bay horse and a Colt revolver, I believe. Both of which, as you said, he shouldn't have given his age, and we never really find out how he came into possession of them. But that sort of shrouds him in this mystery of how did he wind up with these possessions in the first place,
and also how did he get to Mexico?
Right? Yeah,
and he's reluctant to really say anything about it. There's one scene I remember. They do some work for this man who, out of hospitality, has them over for dinner, tells them they can stay the night. Blevins, of course, he makes a fool of himself. I think he trips over something. So he decides that he doesn't want to be embarrassed, so he goes out and sleeps in the cold. There's a thunderstorm later. He loses the horse, he loses the gun, and he actually has to become a horse. If he wasn't a horse thief before, he's certainly technically a horse thief after he rides into town to get his horse back.
To steal back his own horse that, for all we know, he had already stolen.
Yeah, he's almost this. If you wanted to go into symbolism, he's either not naivete, but almost like almost a pernicious fool. Like he doesn't mean to do it, but the fact that everything he does turns into shit really just messes with the characters, especially Cole, who later on in the book sets up a pretty nice life for himself.
Yeah, which is, it's interesting because they pick up on this right away, and they, again, they're reluctant to let him tag along, but they sort of let their softness or they're a little too kind, and they allow him to, even though they I think they know from the beginning that he's trouble.
What was the line? He's like, "Why should we let you ride with us?" And he's like, "Because I'm American."
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, well, that is pretty good line. And actually, like, all right, fair enough.
Yeah, considering where you're at, yeah. And he's a child.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think it's interesting with the thunderstorm part. I found interesting because he loses everything. Like it's basically a mudslide ostensibly, and he loses his when they find him, he's he's in his like underwear, missing boots, right? He's lost everything, and I kind of think maybe that's sort of the imagery of that fool, that sort of pernicious fool. Like you see him there, sort of stripped naked to what he really is.
Yeah, there's another part where it's clear that he hasn't eaten all night, and they're given lunch by the family that let them stay with them that night. He's like, so when are we gonna break into that lunch? And he's like, it's 7 a.m., dude. We're not eating for hours. He's like, yeah, we could just take a look at it, see what's in there. He's equal. Blevins is equal parts stupid and prideful, which is like the worst combination to be. If you're a guy, you're either, you don't want to be both of those things.
What is that old John Wayne line? If you're going to be stupid, you got to be tough.
Right. And I mean, Blevins, he tries to be tough, but he's a literal child. Um, so as tough as he tries to be, it only gets him in trouble. Uh, probably the majority of the book takes place on this ranch. Uh, John Grady becomes basically a horse tamer on a
Well,
ranch.
well, yeah, you gotta remember too, though, that they've lost Blevins at this point, right? Because
Right.
after they've stolen the horse, or after he stole the horses, the Mexican authorities come, they chase them down, and in the chase, Blevins disappears.
Yeah, they start
And
looking for 3 Americans,
mhm.
and whether intentionally or not, Blevins kind of leaves them in the lurch. And as far as Rollins and Cole are concerned, it's good riddance. Unfortunately, not for too long though.
Well, yeah, they wind up at the, like you said, that the hacienda, right? And you get to see kind of, and as somebody who grew up on a small farm with horses, it was kind of interesting to see the way McCarthy kind of shows you that John Grady Cole is sort of a horse whisperer, right?
Mhm.
And it's something that is noticed. And I can't remember the name of the guy that runs the hacienda. What was his name?
I think they just call him El Patron.
Yeah, El Patron. Yeah, that's all. Yeah, but and I think in the movie they gave him a name, but yeah, in the book
I
he
actually didn't
doesn't.
see the movie.
Don't do it.
No,
It's,
no.
it's not worth it.
All right.
But we can talk about that later. But yeah, he notices and he sees these skills in him and gives him, a sort of a position of prestige on the hacienda.
So there's also a young woman named Alejandra. She's the daughter of the patron. She is. It's interesting. They try and Mexico has a very uh, clear cut caste system, sort of. If you are a don, if you are a landowner, and you command a lot of respect, it doesn't even matter so much what you do, because I've seen this also in the cartel community. Uh, there are expectations for bringing up your children in a certain way, almost in a sort of Victorian European way.
Yeah, it's really clear that they're trying to sort of emulate European high society or continental European high society, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know too much about the like Napoleonic Mexico, but I know that had a huge effect on the way that the culture has sort of bore itself out.
Yeah, I mean the was it the last emperor or the king of Mexico? I think he was a Habsburg, I believe.
Mm.
So like there's a strong, a very strong, especially strong German connection there, which is why all Mexican beer is just German beer.
Yeah,
You
and
know.
I don't know if you're partake in a little Pacifico now and then, but that is a fine lager.
Yeah, and even their music, right? Like it's basically polka. If you
Yeah,
think about
actually,
mariachi
yeah.
music.
Now that I if I listen to it in my head a little bit, I'm like, yeah, no, that tracks with polka music. That's really interesting. I never put that together.
Yeah, very, very heavily influenced. And you'll notice this in McCarthy's other books. The Germans show up in Mexico often, even in Blood Meridian, right? When
Yeah.
is it Blood Meridian when the guy gets his eye sucked out?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so that the German in that,
So I had another episode talking about the sequel to this book, The Crossing, right? And most of what we talked about was land ownership in that, whereas in All the Pretty Horses, there's a pretty clear distinction of what is quote unquote America and what is Mexico. Whereas in The Crossing, it's a lot more fungible and kind of changes with the by the day.
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do, and this might, I kind of see the same thing in Blood Meridian, but it seems like McCarthy is kind of looking at Mexico as the last frontier. I saw that in The Crossing as well, but like it's almost to me like John Grady Cole wants to be a cowboy, and the last place left for him to try and do that is Mexico.
Right, right. And there's almost like the kid in Blood Meridian,
Yeah.
where it's clear that the West is closing, and these guys who have the spirit of wanting to be on the frontier are just scrambling to find any little bit of that left that they can hold on to. It's like if you ever saw The Sopranos, you've got Tony Soprano saying, I think I came into this late. It seems like I got in and it was the end of this thing.
Yeah, it's very much. Have you ever heard that Jimmy Buffett song, "A Pirate Looks at 40"?
Mm,
And it's just him, reflecting on being born, wanting to be a pirate, growing up on the ocean, and realizing you were born too late for that.
right. It's like born too late to sail the seas, born too soon to sail the sky or sail the stars, something like that.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I think John Grady Cole's the book takes place in, I think, in like 1949, I believe
Yep.
is right. Yeah,
That's
and
at least where it
so
starts. Yeah.
yeah, so this is really when America's really industrializing and kind of becoming this world power, and these frontier spaces are slowly disappearing, and he's sort of like the what John Wayne is in every movie. He's sort of that, but trapped in this world that doesn't have a place for him.
Right. Uh, and you could say that Alejandra is in some ways she is a direct repudiation of that life. I mean, she's educated, well refined. She's constantly going to Mexico City to continue her studies, um, and yet there's this instant attraction between the two of them. They become lovers. It's clear that John develops deep feelings for her, uh, and is even warned by a couple of people, including Alejandra's great aunt, to that it has to stop, that there's no possible way that they can be together, and that she needs that Alejandra, in order to live in society, needs to maintain her honor. And by that, of course, they mean her maidenhead, which is kind of can't you can't unfuck her.
Well, see, I find the that particular scene in which the aunt, when she warns John, because she knows what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she calls him up to the house and has this conversation with him. And McCarthy gives you basically this like crash course in Mexican history as far as the revolution is concerned through
Right.
her. But during that, what I found interesting is that, especially in modern media, what you'll notice is that the women will often share the same experience and then be sympathetic because of that. But in
Right.
this particular incident, the aunt relays her story that is somewhat similar, this sort of forbidden love, whatever. And it actually has the opposite effect. Instead of her being sympathetic, she's adamantly opposed to them being together because she knows how it's going to end.
Right. Right.
And she basically, I found that really interesting that her experience actually, instead of making her sympathetic, makes her turn against it. She's much more rational, and she's much more concerned, like you said, with the reputation and the future of her niece than she is about her emotional feelings or love or anything like that.
That scene. I don't know if you've ever read Anna Karenina.
Yes.
My
Yeah.
wife is currently going through it for the first time. I've read it before. It's a masterpiece, right? And well, let me start with this. Tolstoy hated Shakespeare. He especially hated King Lear, but he really hated Shakespeare and like everything about him. And I was thinking about, when I'd heard that, I was thinking about, well, if you think about it, Anna Karenina is kind of like Romeo and Juliet, but the opposite,
Mm.
right? When you're chasing your passions,
Hmm.
it's seen as like the star-crossed lovers, the fire that blames hot but briefly, and these kids ruin their lives, and it actually, because of the beauty of their love, it creates peace in Pamplona, right? Whereas Tolstoy said writes Anna Karenina with more or less the same sort of setup, right? Quote unquote star-crossed lovers who are so madly hot for each other that they just blow up their lives. Anna especially, who was sort of known for her virtuousness, and who was well respected for that, blows up her life over her passions, and it leads to her death. So what you have here in All the Pretty Horses and in McCarthy, you see the attempt, right? You see John Grady Cole sort of chase after Alejandra, but she herself is, and we see this later in the book. After he goes away for a while and comes back to the hacienda to see her, she tells him that it's impossible, that they can't move forward. She has a duty, just as he sort of has a duty as well. So there's a much more realistic and almost more honorable way that McCarthy handles these issues.
Yeah, because when she returns from, I think she'd gone. Did she go to Mexico City or Europe?
Yeah, she goes to Mexico City to do a little studying, and he doesn't know that he plans to talk to her, have the to use the millennial speak, to define the relationship, right?
Yeah, and he doesn't know she's back.
Yeah, he doesn't know
she
she's
doesn't even
back.
go see him. Yeah.
Yeah, she tries to, and her intent is to tell him by not seeing him that he's just a boy to her, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's clear that there are some real feelings there, that she does have, that she does think of him as more than just a guy.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting, as you brought up, that it's so common for these types of stories to be framed as if, because you feel a certain way, you're allowed to act on it and everything will be okay in the end. When in reality, as you mentioned in Anna Karenina, it's her decision destroys not only her own life, but everybody around her, right? It has an impact on everybody. And it's something that, isn't necessarily said explicitly, but is very clear with Alejandra, is that she realizes that she has a higher duty. And that if she were to do this, and to run off with him or whatever it is he's wanting, she would destroy other people and herself. And she realizes that, which I find refreshing in the sense that you don't see that often, and you definitely don't see that from a female character.
Right. And I mean, they're both 16. They don't say how old Alejandra is. We can guess that she's like 16 as well. So there's a level of maturity there that certainly we don't see in 16-year-olds today. Or at least, when I was 16, I wasn't even thinking that clearly, and I didn't have
Do you think part of that is because I've read the book twice, and I've always felt like John Grady Cole was sort of living trying to be the ideal cowboy, and part of being the ideal cowboy is like wooing the woman, and kind of stealing her away. And
I didn't see him as that self-conscious about it.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, if maybe it wasn't. He didn't realize that.
I think he embodied the ideal cowboy without having to think too hard about it. He wasn't trying to. I think he genuinely loves his life on the ranch, and when he sees that threatened, he's going to crawl and scrape together whatever kind of life he can. That's like that. But I don't see him, because it's also brought up that he's like one of the best horsemen anyone's ever seen.
Yeah, I don't think that I don't think that it was intentional. I think growing up in that environment and being that, there's an ideal, that he sort of embodied subconsciously, and that's part of it. Is whether he was intending to or not, like that's part of the cowboy, and he felt that he had to do that, or he was kind of driven to do it, whether he realized it or not. But I don't know.
So we're talking about I mean, and this is part of what is dubbed McCarthy's border trilogy, right? So three novels that deal with the Texas-Mexico border. Uh, the Not half the book is in Spanish, but a good portion of the book, a good portion of the dialogue is in Spanish. Uh, even when he's north of the Rio Grande, John Grady Cole speaks in Spanish to the Mexican people that live on his grandfather's ranch. There's certainly there's something about the fact that he's chasing the cowboy lifestyle and has to go to another country to do it, with a very different culture, but at the same time, it's very similar. What McCarthy's clearly saying that as much as we draw this line between the southern United States and northern Mexico, there's a lot more in common there. And as we're, well, I mean, with the current election, we'll see what happens. I think it's maybe not a solution, but sort of another reprieve. But as the Latino population of the United States grows, we're going to probably see more and more uh, cultural diffusion between North and South, like we see in this book. I want, especially since you're a Texan, John, I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
No, I think it's it's interesting because one, that's sort of embodied in the character of John Grady Cole, because he grows up on this ranch with a lot of Mexicans who, like you said, have been on there for generations. So he speaks Spanish fluently because that's also a half of his life. So for him, it's interesting too, because Mexico is not that foreign. It wouldn't be as foreign as if, you or I went down there, right? He has a much closer relation to it. But one of the interesting things, and I got into a Twitter spat with someone a while back, and I don't remember who, it's not really important, but they were trying to say, that the Hispanic culture has like no impact on the United States. And I made the point that, well, you had a lot of these people that fought at the Alamo, and the first, mayor of San Antonio, when it's founded as a town, is a Tejano that had served, I think, under Sam Houston. And so that's a part of American culture,
Right.
Southwestern culture, that people don't really, when it gets transported out of Texas and in the Southwest, a lot of people don't realize how much of that is Hispanic culture. So I don't think it's as foreign to people as they even realize it. I think they think it's more foreign than it is, or they conflate people from other places like, Nicaragua or some of these other Central American countries. And that's a big difference between that and Mexico. And so I think these Mexicans in particular, there's a lot of cross-cultural, sort of pollination that we already have, and that I don't think is nearly as big of an issue.
Right. And in fact, there's you can see maybe even in the voting habits of Mexicans in Texas, right? Because Democrats have been saying forever, oh, we're going to flip Texas blue. We're going to, the Latinos are going to vote our way because we're the party of immigrants, whatever. But you actually see a little bit of cultural chauvinism from Mexicans living in Texas and the Southwest United States, and maybe the United States as a whole, looking down on Central and South Americans.
Well, and people also need to remember that when it comes to, even though interracial marriage isn't a super common thing, the most common group to do that is white Americans and Mexicans, right? The rates of interracial marriage between those groups are extremely high, so so you see a lot of the fusion just because of that. And to me, that's when I see those numbers, I think that's probably because those cultures are not incompatible. If they were, I don't think you would see that high of a rate of intermarriage.
Yeah, there was I've seen this meme like 5 different times. It's like when you're at La Casa and you see and you're at the family gathering, you can always spot out who the white boy is or something. Like there's always like one white boy who's like the boyfriend or the husband of somebody.
Oh yeah, where you've seen that meme about the future of America, and like one of the groups is like the Tejano Hispanic. It's like Hispano Teuton, I think is what they
right,
call
right,
it.
right, right, right.
So yeah, no, I think in Texas it's just par for the course, and my family's from West Texas, where that's all it was whites and a lot of German immigrants and Mexicans, and they just kind of intermingled.
Now, to kind of get back to the book a little bit. Well, actually, before, I had a question that I'll probably end up cutting this part because you said West Texas, and I'm a big fan of the film Friday Night Lights,
Oh yeah.
and the book was really good as well, and it goes into like what it's everything about West Texas. So I kind of wanted to see what you thought about that.
No, it's actually interesting. The high school, was it Permian Odessa,
Hmm.
right? That was my mom's rival high school.
Oh, so your mom went to Midland Lee?
Yes, yeah.
Oh,
So
that's funny.
yeah, and most of my family's from the Lubbock area.
Okay.
Most of them. So I mean, that's where, and I have family that has a ranch out there. They're like real cowboys. Like when they come to visit, it's kind of it's wild because I'm so removed from it now, but they'll tell stories about, they'll brag about things about roping and stuff like that. Like the other day, my uncle, they came into town and he was telling a story and bragging about the type of rope they were using to lasso horses, and he was saying it as if we were all supposed to know,
Right,
like
right.
the way you would describe a certain type of car. Like everybody's supposed to be like, oh yeah, and impressed.
So, oh
It's a
yeah, no,
very different culture.
the windshield wiper fluid, totally.
Yeah, it's an interesting culture, and it's probably why I'm sort of softer on the debate about the Hispanic culture, because it's just normal. It's
Right, right. It's like you're swimming in that ocean already.
yeah, it's everywhere, and you see it, and
And in fact, it's not like something new because Texas was originally part of Mexico.
mhm.
There, like you've got people that have lived there before Texas was a thing. When it was just a patch of land that the Comanches used to raid.
Right, and people don't realize that the people, the Tejanos, the people, the Hispanics that have been there prior to and when Texas became a state, they don't see themselves as Mexican per se, right? They see themselves as something completely different, but as a part of America.
I did. I remember what I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
Uh, a few months ago, Mackie and I and John Cinder were talking about country music,
Hmm.
and I bemoaned the fact that country music it's no longer country and western. It's you don't see a lot of cowboy songs coming out these days, like a la like Marty Robbins, right?
Right.
And Mackie said something to me. He's like, "Well, because all the cowboys are Mexican now."
Hmm.
And I sat with that for a while, and it's only right now that I realized that I had something to say about that. I was like, damn, like we've actually lost something pretty central to the American identity. Uh,
Yeah, I think it's also because a lot of the Cowboys, what non-Mexican Cowboys that are left are all up. They're not in Texas anymore. There are some, but most of them are up Montana,
mhm,
Wyoming, which is
right,
a completely different culture. But I've had this discussion with people before, and I always tell them you can tell what happened to cowboy culture by watching pro bull riding and look at the top bull riders now. The vast majority of them are from Brazil, right?
interesting.
Because there's 5 countries that really participate in bull riding in any significant number, and that's the United States, Australia, Mexico, Brazil, and Canada. And in my lifetime, I watched it go from, like Tuff Heedman and Lane Frost, uh, who were huge in the '90s, and now it's all Brazilians almost. The vast majority. There are still some Americans, but if you look at the top 10, probably 6 to 7 of them are Brazilian half the time.
Yeah, it's UFC bull riding. It's all going to Brazil.
Yeah, because they have a huge cowboy culture. I mean, obviously it's the gaucho. It's a little different, but it's they adopted the same bull riding.
I wonder how much of that do you think is due to didn't a lot of Southerners move to Brazil after the Civil War?
Well, there's a town in Brazil, and I can't remember the name of it, but the people are called Confederados, and they moved down there. Brazil basically invited them because of their, their agricultural experience and all. Most of them left, but I think what it actually is my family has been in the cotton business all the way up until myself. Like nobody else is anymore, except for my grandfather's in his 80s. And so I've been to King Ranch in down near Houston, and I've been to some ranches in Brazil. In Brazil, the ranching culture in Brazil is massive, and they have, King Ranch is the largest ranch in the U.S., and there are 20 ranches that size, if not bigger, in
Wow.
Brazil. It's a huge, and they have a huge cowboy culture because of the beef they produce. So I think it more has to do with the amount of land and the production of beef and sort of the ranching culture that they've adopted and taken over, as opposed to because most of the Confederados left, and of course that's Southern culture, not Western
Right, yeah.
cowboy culture.
Well, but I mean, a lot of Western culture, you could say, came out of the Civil War and Southerners having nowhere else to go, so striking out west because there was nothing for them in the South.
Well, it's interesting because you see the Southern culture get transplanted to the West after the war, and then you get this new thing, this Western culture, right? The Southwestern culture, which then gets kind of taken back and put back into the South. So now Southerners wear things like cowboy boots that come out, and this kind of cowboy hats. So they kind of recycled their own, something they created themselves, but brought back new, I guess, in a weird way.
Getting back to the book a little bit because we have to do our weave, right? Everything's going fine until Mexican Rangers come to the ranch and arrest Rollins and Cole, and they don't know what's going on. They have to ride miles and miles far off. There's a really kind of sweet scene where Cole is able to get these little girls to get him a cigarette.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that part.
And Rollins is like, they're not. He bets Rollins that they'll give him a cigarette, and Rollins says, "Well, what do I win if they don't?" He's like, "Well, you'll get my cigarette." And I don't know. I thought that was really funny, but
no, yeah. Well, I think it's important to mention too, though, that the Rangers show up and then they leave, and then they come back a second time and arrest all of them.
Right.
And I always and one thing that always frustrated me both times I read this was in the beginning when they first wind up at the ranch, and El Patron asks them, who they were with or whatever, and he lies. And he says it was just the two of them instead of mentioning Blevins. And every time I read it, I'm like, I always stop. And I'm like, you idiot. All you had to do was tell the truth.
Yep.
Because everything else that happens from this point that we're discussing is hinged on him lying in the beginning.
Yep. Yeah, if he would have, you can tell that El Patron has immense respect for Cole and what he can do. They played billiards at one point. They talk about Mexican history. It would never get to the point where he's like, "Oh man, I love you like a son, marry my daughter." But he definitely could have created a good life for himself, the kind of life that he wanted.
I think he would have stood up and protected him if he had told the truth. And it's because he lied. The lie is kind of almost an offense to Patron.
Right. Oh yeah, no, yeah, definitely. I think that if he'd have been honest with them, even if he would have said there's this kid, he went nuts and stole back his own horse apparently, and thank goodness we're not with him anymore. Could have turned out a lot different, but yes, you're right, because the relationship is founded on a lie. El Patron has to excise himself from them. Really good stuff from McCarthy there. They end up in prison. They find Blevins already there, and Blevins, being the fool that he is, he doesn't understand why he's there. and it takes the fourth man in the cell, an old Mexican guy, to say, "Oh yeah, that kid shot somebody and killed him."
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, because Blevins has gone back to go get his pistol.
yep, he needs to get. He got his horse back, and he wants to
Mm-hmm.
get his Colt pistol. And in the process of doing so, he shoots and kills a guy.
Which is again is a kind of a window into his foolishness because he'd gotten away. You know, because I think if I remember correctly, they had caught him and he escaped a second time with his horse, and he had to go back and get his pistol. And in that process, he kills the guy, which then gets him arrested.
So they're going to be transferred from the small jail to a prison. They take another ride, and they stop off somewhere, and Blevins is just taken off and executed. There's kind of no ceremony about it. They just kind of shoot him.
Yeah, they drag him off and they're kind of helpless. Like they don't see it happen, but John Grady Cole and Rollins, they hear it, they see him drug off, and they hear the shots fired.
And you think about that. On the one hand, they shouldn't really have any sympathy for the kid because he did bring this upon himself. In some sense, justice has been served, but he's still it's still a 13-year-old kid, and he's still somebody that they knew. So later on, when Cole gets his revenge, it's almost unearned.
Yeah. It's I think you're right. I think the reason that they feel sympathy, or especially because John Grady Cole seems so torn up about it, as we'll see at the end of the novel, is because it's this kid and he's sort of helpless. And I often wonder sometimes if part of John Grady Cole's guilt is because he maybe could have done more to help him before he wound up in that situation.
So they go to prison, and prison sucks.
Well, yeah, it's your typical. It's got that unique Mexican prison thing where you're just thrown into the prison and it's dog eat dog.
Yeah, it's kind of it's just four walls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's no.
Yeah, it's got its own politics, its own, like, there's a guy that runs basically the prison on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
But
and
you're
he
not
extorts them for money.
right. Yeah, he extorts. It
remind.
If you've ever seen the movie Get the Gringo
Mm-hmm.
with Mel Gibson, it's so if anyone's ever seen it, it's sort of that. It's obviously more primitive because of the time period, but it's that same sort of environment where it's like you're just locked in there. There's prisoners, and the only job of the prison is to keep them inside, and that's it.
Yeah. So both he and Rollins get pretty beat up on a constant basis. John Grady gets stabbed at one point. He doesn't know what's happened to Rollins, and he kills a guy. He kills another inmate in a knife fight, and he doesn't know what he's going to do until he recovers and he's actually freed from the prison. And it's the aunt who has written to somebody important and gotten them freed on the condition that Alejandra has to give up on John. So yeah, that plot line does sort of resolve itself, and we do see that Alejandra was not faithful, but what did have more than just attraction towards John. The fact that she has to make this promise in order to save his life.
Right. Yeah. And of course they're released from the prison. And when, he finds out this, he basically tells Lacey that he's going to go see Alejandra one more time. And of course, Lacey, it is the only part of the novel I've ever had sort of an issue with, is like Lacey just disappears then.
Yeah. Rollins actually, like, he's done. He's sacrificed a little too much of himself for Cole. You can see even when they get arrested, a bit of resentment is building towards
Yeah,
Cole.
and I
And
think that's partly because they wind up on this hacienda, and Cole gets this prestige position as essentially a horse whisperer
right,
trainer, and Rollins is left to just be a hand.
just a hand, yeah, just a ranch hand. Like, yeah. If John Grady's getting like main character treatment, Rollins is kind of getting the shit end of every stick.
Yeah, and
Where's his big booty Latina?
where's his AOC? Uh, no, yeah, because then he almost dies right in the prison,
Yep.
and you kind of don't know. You don't know if he's alive or dead for a while until, of course, John Grady gets in that knife fight and sees him basically in the infirmary or finds out. And I think that's why he leaves. He's just done. Because he's kind of sacrificed a lot for his friend. Um, and it's not that John Grady's done anything against him intentionally or out of spite. It's just, the way things sort of played out. And I think you're right. I think Rollins is just kind of done. Like he's like, I'm going home and I can't do this anymore.
And of course, John Grady, he goes to find Alejandra. She has to keep her promise, or she chooses to keep her promise.
Mm-hmm.
It's McCarthy is not known for the women he writes. I can only really think of maybe two prominent women two prominent women that he writes, and one of them is like an autistic genius who's basically just a dude.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah.
then Alejandra, who is has very little to say, is kind of just there as an object of John's affection, but at the critical moment where she can show a little bit of character and show uh, who she is, she chooses to keep her promise uh, to not be with John, and also to maintain the way things are, right? To maintain not only her honor but her family's honor.
Yeah, because John doesn't do that, right? They have one final meeting, which even she, I think, is reluctant to do, but they do, and they sleep together one more time, and then he asks her to marry him, and she's like, "No, I'm leaving," and that's when she goes to Europe, I believe, right? I think they sent her to France. She was going to do school or something,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah,
She has to go be a fine lady, and there's another book, D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover. Have you ever read that?
no,
It's a post World War One book. It was banned for a long time for breaking obscenity laws. It's about this English lady whose husband was severely paralyzed in World War One, and she finds sexual gratification with the groundskeeper, and then they fall in love. Kind of a subversive tale, but nonetheless, pretty decent read. And yeah, this is our culture is constantly telling us to buck these trends
mm-hmm.
and to pursue true love or whatever. But we do have a duty higher than our passions. We do have we owe we are not the owners of ourselves. Whether it's God, whether it's our family, whether it's the family that we come from or the family that we want to build in the future, we have more obligations and we owe more than just flights of fancy.
Yeah, and you can imagine when you're reading this, you can imagine what would happen if she said yes,
Mm-hmm.
right? You kind of know that she's doing the right thing, but you can see the writing on the wall as far as like, okay, well, if they decide they're madly in love and they have to be together, this is going to end tragically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, they'll suddenly, El Patron will send the Mexican Rangers after them again. To become outlaws or something, and everything will go wrong. This, that, and the other. Like, it only ends one way, uh, and it makes for exciting. It makes for an exciting read, but that's not a life I would wish on anyone to actually live.
No, and it would, especially since we kind of know, obviously, through the City on a Plane, we kind of know how John Grady Cole's life plays out. All those, the possibility just is destroyed for a momentary passion, because of course, I don't think that even if they're in love with each other, there's nothing real and tangible there. It's just almost
it's just a
it's
couple of
lustful. Yeah.
16-year-olds who have found sexual discovery in one another.
Right. Yeah, and they're willing to destroy everything over that. And like you said, something that's really encouraged in every form of media, probably very damaging to many marriages today.
So let's see. I get, and I mean, yeah, if John Grady Cole, he gets rejected by Alejandra, so he leaves, and he runs into the Mexican captain who killed Blevins, and thinks about killing him. He thinks about getting revenge for Blevins, but not only like I said, it's not earned. Like Blevins was a criminal. He did kill somebody. He probably stole that horse at least twice. Who knows how he got the pistol in the first place. But also there, whatever grievance Cole has with the Mexican captain, Mexico has its own sort of grievances with him, right? You've got these guys, this band of revolutionaries who capture him and are probably going to kill him, and they have a long list of reasons why this guy has to die, and it almost seems trivial to John at this point, whether it's him that does it or somebody else.
Yeah, they're the men of the country, I think, as they're described,
yeah.
right? Because he steals the horses. He steals his horse back and Blevins' horse in the process, right? And he rides off.
I think he steals. I think he also gets Rollins' horse back as well.
Yeah, and as they ride off, he's sort of this gunfight, and he escapes with the captain, and he's being pursued by these guys who he doesn't. I don't think he knows who they are, and he assumes they're basically with the captain, I think, or they're more the Mexican Rangers. And when they finally come upon them, they turn out to be, like you said, that they're described as men of the land, but they're like revolutionaries or somebody who has an issue with him, and they take him off.
I will say it's pretty awesome that John Grady is able to cauterize his own wound with the hot barrel of his pistol. Again, this is a 16-year-old kid, but this whole adventure that he's on, you can't even say it's like a hero's journey or like a path to manhood or something like that. He's already, before he sets off, sort of proven to be a man. He hasn't changed. It's more that he was who he always was supposed to be and is only now just being tested.
Or being given the opportunity to actually act that out, right?
Right.
Yeah, because there's never a moment in the story where you feel like he's incapable of anything, or he has to sort of be, like you said, become a man. He can already do all these things. It's just the environment now is sort of forcing him to act on them, I guess.
Yeah, it's ironic. There are very few character arcs in McCarthy books. Every character is more or less the same, beginning to end. I can only really think the kid has sort of a character arc. He goes from violent kid to sort of contemplative man. But that's really about it as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I can't think of any other. I was trying to think of the difference between this and The Crossing, but it's really not. There may be a little more of a coming of age element in The Crossing, but it's not.
Right.
it's not that much different.
Yeah, really, the only thing that changes in a McCarthy book is the land itself, and then not even then. It's really just a change of location rather than actual dynamicism, if that's a word.
We can make it one. You're a writer.
Yeah. Why not? Yeah,
Just make
neologisms
us
are my
one.
specialty.
Just do whatever you want. Somebody came up with the term stock feet. You can come up with that.
Sock feet. Oh. Yeah, and then John Grady, he makes it home. He finds out that his father's died. He tries to find out whose horse Blevins had, and he can't, lending credence to the idea that maybe it was Blevins' horse the whole time. Right. And that only kind of makes him feel a little bit more guilty until really he goes to court and is exonerated for everything.
Yeah, because he relays the story to the judge, and the judge is even like, "This is absurd." Like, he doesn't he believes him because he can tell he's telling the truth, but you can tell he's sort of like,
he believes him, but he can't believe it.
Right? Yeah. And then he has that long conversation with the judge, where that's where you get this sort of guilt that he has for Blevins and for the guy he killed in prison.
Right.
And the judge sort of kind of tries to tell him it's not his fault, but you can kind of tell that he still carries it with him. And I think that, and then seeing the funeral for the Mexican lady,
mm-hmm.
Those that because his father's died, so he comes back home, his father's dead, and then the Mexican woman who had worked on the ranch for her whole life, she dies, and that's like his last connection to anything.
Right. He has nothing. He has nothing left to be there for. He does give Rollins back his own horse.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's right. He does meet. Yeah, because Rollins is. Yeah, I forgot he shows up again.
And Rollins sort of settles back into civilization. It's interesting too with the conversation with the judge. You have the thing that McCarthy has been writing his whole life, his entire work is the difference between savagery and civilization, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the judge absolves John Grady of any wrongdoing because he just did what he had to do. He did what he had to do to survive the wilderness, to survive out there. Whereas if he did any of this in civilization, there would be something to do because there are laws in civilization. Whereas he went to a lawless place, a place of kill or be killed.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I see that as that is the law, right? It's survival, mm-hmm. right? So in the prison is a good example of that because it's a prison. It's not like an American prison. It's basically, like I said, it's just walls containing criminals to keep them away from everybody else. And the only rule in there is to survive. And the guy attacks him with a knife. He kills him. I mean, what other option do you have? And I don't know if maybe that's John Grady's guilt is a part of the fact that the civilization part of him, or the part of him that grew up in civilization, has sort of tainted him to fully accept, life out in the wilderness.
Yeah, and you can see this with the end of the book too, because he doesn't go back down to Mexico at the end. He travels west towards the Pacific Ocean. We don't know how far. Well, I mean, we know generally how far because of Cities of the Plain, but we don't. At the end of the book, we don't know where he's going, but we know that he's still. It's interesting. He's riding that border between mm-hmm. civilization and savagery. So rather than picking one side or the other, he's kind of just staying on that bleeding edge.
Yeah, it's interesting because he sort of rides off into the sunset, which is a very cowboy thing to do, so to speak, right? And it has a very similar ending to the crossing, you know, with the kid in the crossing sitting in the road with this open road ahead of him, you know. It's very similar, but I think what I like about the ending of this book, and one of the reasons that when people ask, there's a lot of talk of McCarthy, especially in these spears, and people are always like, well, what should you read first? And everybody says No Country for Old Men or The Road. And I always recommend All the Pretty Horses because of the fact that, just like with this ending, he takes the Western genre and there's enough of it for you to see it as a Western, but he turns it into something else. And I think it's his most accessible work, but also there's something very impressive to me about taking something that could easily be sort of genre fiction and turning it into a piece of art, and something as great as All the Pretty Horses is.
Yeah, this is the book that really put McCarthy on the map in terms of national consciousness. Like everybody who read books knew McCarthy was a genius up until he published this book in the 90s. But this won the National Book Award. I think this is the reason he went on Oprah. Or was that for The Road? I forget.
That was The Road. Yeah.
That was The Road. But this one was in Oprah's book club, definitely.
Yeah, this book has gotten overshadowed in recent years because of the stuff that he produced later on, and he had already gotten famous. So I think a lot of people don't realize that this, like you said, this was his first. Really, this is where he exploded on this sort of the mainstream literary scene.
And this is where he kind of learned how to write for a mass audience.
Mm-hmm.
You know, his early books, you know, Outer Dark or The Orchard Keeper, or Child of God, or Suttree's sort of its own thing. Suttree's,
yeah, true, yeah.
But his early books deal with some really heavy themes. They're like kind of
incest and cannibalism.
Incest, cannibalism, murder, usually all on the same page. You know, he's definitely really until Blood Meridian, you could say that his influence by Faulkner is really on the page. And then he moves out west and he leaves the South and becomes he writes cowboy books, you know. But this one is his he's tamped down a little bit the gruesome violence, and he adds a love story. It's very much this it really plays to all audiences, and I'm surprised that I heard the film was bad. I never watched it, but it doesn't it surprises me that the film is bad, but it also doesn't at the same time, because that's just the way that these things go.
Well, what's interesting is Billy Bob Thornton directed it, and he was a huge fan of the novel, and the original cut of the film was almost 3 hours. And when the studio saw it, they were like, no one's watching this.
What the hell is this?
They cut it down, and then they tried to market it as a romance. Because if you watch the trailers for it, you really see this. It's Penelope Cruz and Matt Damon, right, are the two main. And they try to, if you watch the trailer, you think you're going to go see a love story. That's what you think you're seeing. And that's just a subplot that really doesn't have that much to do with the overall narrative. And so I think that's why it failed, partly, is because that they tried to turn it into that. And you know, if that's what you think it is, and then 3/4 of the way they wind up in a prison, and you only see the girl one more time, I mean, you're going to wonder what you're watching.
Right.
You know,
it's not Legends of the Fall.
No.
Which is another cowboy book. Actually, it's a Montana cowboy book that has a few different love story plots in it.
But at least that one, the movie is at least. I think the movie's at least equally good.
Yeah. Well, no, I'd say the story's better, but I mean, the movie is at least watchable.
Yeah, it's close enough that it's enjoyable, right?
Yeah.
Whereas this, I think, it would be interesting if that 3-hour cut existed, and you could see if maybe Billy Bob Thornton was that true to the novel. But
release the Thornton cut.
Yeah, but regardless, they tried to turn it into like a, you know, because this came out right after Titanic. I think it came out
Oh, okay, I see.
early, like 2000 or the end of '99. So
Right.
they were trying to capitalize on that, and this epic romance, and it
Yeah,
really didn't take off.
it's funny how you have these huge movies, and then you can see uh, every studio trying to recreate that magic formula.
Mhm.
Whether it's what was that? Pearl Harbor, right?
Yeah.
Was just Titanic, but in World War II. Or I guess the film adaptation of All the Pretty Horses is just Titanic, but in Mexico with cowboys.
Yeah, they were like, "Oh, look, we can create these epic romances." And they churned them out. Four Feathers comes to mind. There was a bunch of them in that time period of these like 3-hour epic romance films, but unfortunately, Billy Bob Thornton didn't get the chance to do that, and so nobody would see a decent McCarthy adaptation until The Road.
Right.
You
Well,
know,
no, didn't which came out first, The Road or No Country? I think No Country for Old Men came
don't
out first.
know. I'm gonna Google it. How about that?
We got these magic machines. We can do that. I think No Country for Old Men came out in 2005.
2007, I believe. Well, maybe you're right. I thought it came out 2007. The Road was 2006. No Country for Old Men was 2007.
Oh,
So they're
okay.
a year
All right.
apart, basically the
All right.
same though.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, but the Road is really good. I think. Well, our friend Last Things has a film festival, and I'm pretty sure a prominent person in our sphere is doing The Road this year.
Well, and that's that to kind of circle back to All the Pretty Horses. The Road overshadowed it, right?
Oh,
Because
totally.
that was his. This was his mainstream success until that, and it
Right.
always it doesn't. Not, I wouldn't say it bothers me. I get irritated occasionally when people who want to read McCarthy are told to go read that first because, as you know, anyone who's read him, he's not easy to read just because of his lack of punctuation. He'll use these long run-on sentences, and the way he writes is very unique. And I think All the Pretty Horses, if you don't like that, you're not going to like anything else he writes.
True.
You know, and it's
Yeah.
easier to read, and it's an easier test of that. Whereas I think if you get thrown straight into The Road or Blood Meridian, you might not like it. Whereas you would have liked it if you eased yourself into his work.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, even some of his quote unquote early work, like if you read Outer Dark,
Oh yeah,
he doesn't lean into his style as much, but the content is so rough that it's hard to get through.
yeah. Or like Child of God, it's like you're not gonna
No, you're not. You're not.
make yourself read that unless you've already read his work and feel the need to.
Right, yeah, to become a completionist or something. And
Right.
I probably won't read Child of God.
I've never
Just
read it.
I just know it from reputation.
I was gonna say I've read the synopsis enough to know I don't want to read it. So I never touched that one. I read Outer Dark and Suttree though. And Suttree does have one of my favorite McCarthy quotes of all time, which is "Someone's been fucking my watermelons," which is a direct line from the book.
Well, on that note, John, why don't you tell the people what you got coming down the pike, where they can support your work and where they can find more John Slaughter. I know your first draft is complete, if I'm correct. Yes.
Yes, I got the first draft done. I'm doing some. I like to edit by hand, so I printed it all out. I'm doing my own editing, and then I'm going to send it. I have two people that are going to overlook it, so I'm hoping that will be out probably sometime early beginning of the year. It'll depend on publishing though, and how I decide to go about that.
So you've got a novel out. You have 2 different Substacks, right?
I do. I have John Slaughter Substack or Texas John Slaughter Substack.com, which is most of my just cultural musings and political writings, and then I created a separate Substack called Slaughter Stories, which is just some of my fiction and short stories, because apparently there's not a lot of overlap between those audiences.
No.
And, the people who read my political stuff will unsubscribe if I share a short story. So, so I broke them up.
The most popular thing on my Substack is the essay I wrote about visiting Portland.
Oh,
And
really?
and that has gotten more engagement than pretty much anything else, except for the first short story I ever published. But that was because Zero HP Lovecraft was kind enough to promote it around.
Yeah, I don't think there's not a huge audience for fiction, which, and I don't blame them. I don't like reading fiction on the screen.
Yeah,
I like a tangible, like a real book.
yeah. That's
So,
why I'm putting out my short stories soon in a book.
oh, that'll be good. Let me know
Yeah,
when. I'll grab
probably
that.
probably end of the year. I'm waiting on art
Oh,
for the
nice.
cover. Yeah.
Well,
So
hopefully I'll have it. It's my novel's a sort of it's a noir. It's sort of an homage to the noir genre, which is my favorite, but I tried to kind of do what McCarthy did and turn it into something deeper than that. So
nice. All right. Well,
hopefully it
maybe
turns
next
out
time
well.
we'll have you on. We'll do a noir. I'm doing a noir episode, LA
Oh,
Confidential, in a couple weeks.
that's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah, it's gonna be a
Anyway,
good time. As for me, over at the Double Dealer, you can buy a magazine. You can support our work by becoming a paid subscriber. You can buy a couple of my books. You know where to find them. I don't know how to end podcasts, so I will say insert ending here.